All right, Adam, we're here for the start of Oregon week, but first, I think later on in the week we'll preview Oregon, but
Yeah.
let's kind of wrap up the Arizona game. And we talked about it after the game, but a disappointing one for the Buffs. I mean, one that we both felt they needed to get if you want to go to a bowl game. Not saying they can't, but I think that was an important one. And you go back and watch it, and Mel Tucker mentioned it today. It's self-inflicted wounds, and yes, Khalil Tate made a lot of plays, and Arizona made a lot of plays. But boy, you go back and watch it, and there was just so many mistakes the Buffs made in that game.
Yeah, and he talked about it. It was really 8 passes where they got the bulk of their passing yards, and the other I think was 33 pass attempts. They actually did pretty well.
Right.
They did really well against the run, and yeah, it was a tough loss for sure. It's interesting though. I said leading up to the CSU game, there's going to be a point this year when some fans get frustrated with this defense and they start calling out Tyson Summers, and I'm going to lose my mind when that happens.
Yeah.
That's starting to happen in my
Right.
notifications more often. There's a point in that game where 3 of their top 4 defensive backs were out. You had a converted quarterback that has been practicing at safety for a little more than a month out there.
Yeah.
And when there was a time when Lang was rotated out, all 3 defensive linemen on the field were not on campus till this summer.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Right.
The penalties to me, 85 yards to Arizona's 5. That was more of an issue than. I mean, it's going to be a patchwork defense all season. It is what it is. Without Mikael Onu out there on the back end, they're in big trouble defensively.
Yeah, I agree with you on criticism of Tyson Summers. I mean, it's a little early for that. I mean, it's halfway through year one, and he is working with kind of a patchwork defense. There's so many injuries, and frankly, I mean, we talked about it before the season that depth on that defense. I think you and I were both in agreement that we kind of liked the starting group.
Yeah.
But if there was any injuries at all, they were going to be in some trouble. And I don't think it's been as bad as I thought it might be with injuries, but it's still it's patchwork, and you're throwing guys out there that don't have a lot of experience, and I think that's tough.
Mike McIntyre and his staff did a good job of finding some 3-star guys. Nate Lamon, Mustafa Johnson, Laviska Chenault was a 3-star that are playing like blue chip guys. But
Yeah.
when you have recruiting classes that rank 10th, 11th, 12th in the Pac-12 year in and year out, you're not going to have that depth.
Yeah.
And so that's something I give Mel Tucker and this staff credit for really going with the no excuses thing. And there's going to be a point when they've had enough time to get their players in here and implement their system to where a game like Saturday, even if there are a bunch of injuries, from an analytical standpoint, you're going to have to shift over into a no excuses
Right.
situation as well. But we're not at that point 5 games into the Mel Tucker era. We're just not.
Yeah, and, another thing, some people criticize McIntyre's recruiting, and that's valid. But another thing is, the Buffs also lost Hassan Hippolyte. It was not McIntyre's fault. At the end of spring, Hassan would be helping this team right now, I think. And what's your take on Mark Perry? I mean, he was a guy that was highly regarded. People thought this guy might step in as a starter at safety. Well, people were wondering where he was the other day. He hasn't been practicing at safety at all. He's been a star.
Right. And that's, you bring in a true freshman, and this defense is hard enough for even the veteran guys to learn. It's tough because you don't know if Davion Taylor is going to stay healthy the whole year.
Yeah.
So you need a capable backup there. And so you had to pick a spot for Mark Perry to practice at, and they chose Starr. And had he come in day one practicing at safety, maybe he'd be the guy out there and he could help them. But he's still a true freshman. The staff works with these guys every day. They know
Yeah.
where these guys can help them. And if Davion Taylor gets dinged up at some point, you're going to be happy that Mark Perry has been practicing at Starr.
Yeah.
So it's always hindsight. You can't predict the future with injuries.
Yeah, and I talked about him last week because I talked with Mark Perry. He said the first 3 games he goes, I wasn't ready to play.
Yeah.
So he's still kind of swimming a little bit and getting used to things. But yeah, this is a tough defense. We both talked to defenders today. You mentioned 3/4 of the secondary was injured at one point. You talked to the guy that wasn't injured. Delrick Abrams, and I thought he was one of the better buffs the other day. I thought he played really well. Talk about your conversation with Delrick.
Well, a lot of what we're talking about is just kind of moving ahead because of the short week. He said that they came in yesterday and started watching film, so they kind of accelerated that. We heard Mel Tucker say coaches have to kind of burn the midnight oil this week because of it. The great thing is that it's not just the coaches saying no excuses. Delrick was talking about that too. He's like, he wasn't going to give me a quote of woe is us, in the secondary because we have so many injuries, which is great. I mean, they don't have any chance if they start a pity party here. What happens when you start doing that is you go on a 7-game losing streak, which we saw a year
Right.
ago. So that's the benefit there. It was interesting. They're pumping crowd noise in here. Obviously, Autzen Stadium's one of the loudest places in
Yeah.
the Pac-12, so talk to him a little bit about that.
Yeah. I haven't heard any of the Buffs make excuse for injuries. I mean, Steven Montez the other day said, we're not going to start doing that, and other players said the same thing. I talked to Austin Williams, one of the freshman defensive linemen. I asked him about that. I said, hey, is it tough? You're without Mustafa, you're without Jalen Sammy, and he goes, no, not really, because those guys have coached us so much, and the coaches have prepared us so much that we got to go out there and make plays. So even the true freshmen that haven't been here very long are not making excuses. So, but Austin Williams and that defensive line, I mean, Naeem Rodman, guys like that, they played well the other day, and you got to like the future of that position.
Yeah, I mean, the stopping the run was great
Yeah.
on Saturday. If you told me they were going to limit Arizona to that on the ground before the game, I would have assumed Colorado would have found a way to win it. But Khalil Tate just does what he does against CU. It's hard to put it rhyme or reason. So that group up front, we're going to get into Oregon later in the week, but man, they got a big challenge coming up on Friday. That Oregon offensive line is maybe the best in the country, or top 5 probably.
And I asked Austin about that. I said, "You got a tough challenge this week," and he just kind of smiled. He goes, "This might be this is gonna be our toughest challenge of the year." I mean, there's all Americans on that offensive line, and I mean, there's guys that aren't even playing for that offensive line that could probably start for most Pac-12 teams. So he knows they got a tough task in front of him. It would be nice to get Mustafa and or Jalen Sammy back this week, but they're going to need all hands on deck there.
Obviously, Mel Tucker is not going to tell us who's playing. It's going to be going to have to wait until pregame, but it did sound a little encouraging. He talked about a lot of those injured guys. It sounded like we're in the mix today at practice. So I guess we'll see. He kind of talked about how they have to see how they progress, but it sounds like quite a few of those injured guys were at least participating today.
Yeah, he said a lot of those guys were. We don't know which are a lot of the guys, which guys weren't, but we'll find out on Friday. But anything else?
If it's not Mikel Onu out there on Friday night, it could get ugly.
Yeah, he's the one guy. All these guys are important, obviously, but you and I were talking beforehand. If there's one guy out of all the injured guys we've seen that you would like to have on the field on Friday, if you could only pick one, I think I'd pick Mikel.
Yeah, and this staff brought him in here.
Right.
So, again, you got to give this defensive staff some time and not be calling for their heads 5 games into their tenure.
Right. Well, we'll be back later on this week to preview the Oregon game.